Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, A Trauma-Informed Approach to Public Library Social Service. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator today. Our presenters this morning are Jennifer Elkins, Associate Professor at the University of Georgia School of Social Work and the MSW Program Director, Trudy Green, Assistant Director for Public Services at Athens Regional Library System, and Sarah List, Information Services Librarian and Passport Program Manager, also at the Athens Regional Library System. Just a couple announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see our continuing education website. The session is about an hour, so you'll receive one LEU for this presentation. If you're watching an archived recording of this webinar, instructions on how to obtain your LEU are on the video's description on YouTube, or you can also find those instructions on the ISL's continuing education site under LEU policies. Without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to Jennifer, Trudy, and Sarah.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're happy to be here today. I think we're just going to jump right on in. Hold on, here we go. Trudy.
Okay, thank you so much, and thanks, Jennifer. We're delighted to be here today to be able to share the information and everything we've learned about the Trauma-Informed Library. We got the grant. It's an IMLS, Institute in Museum and Library Science Community Catalyst Grant. We got it in 2018. And our main partner for this, of course, is the University of Georgia. And the approach was to be a trauma-informed library as we work with our patrons and our staff and the community. So let me tell you a little bit about the library. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services, and so I work at our headquarters branch library. I'm a reference librarian, work closely with the public. We are the Athens Regional Library System. We're a 5-county system with 11 libraries. You can see our population served, and that's going to be regional. In Athens-Clarke County, we have about 120,000 people. In 2017, our library was the Georgia State Library of the Year, which was a huge honor. We were the first regional system to be named that. So we're a progressive system. We're always looking for new ideas, like most libraries, and how we can best help the public and our patrons. Okay. Next slide, Jennifer, I'm seeing where we are. Okay, so when we first started the grant, the School of Social Work did some surveys among the library staff and the patrons who came into the library, and Jennifer can talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we wanted to get a better sense of who the folks are working at the library. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this here is that there can be a significant shift in differences in the makeup of library systems. So one of the things that we learned in particular is that, and as someone who's not seeped in the world of library service and library science, was very informative. For example, approximately half of this library staff were part-time. Approximately 75% of the staff were white. But in particular, in terms of the years of experience, we had a fairly young, early, or not young, but like early in experience, 5 years or less. The majority of the staff had less than 5 years of experience. So they're still pretty early on. And I know in talking with other library systems that they've had the opposite experience, that the majority of their staff have been there for 10 or more years. So just to give you a little bit of a picture of what the Athens Regional Library System looks like. And similar, we wanted to get a picture of what what do library staff see as the most pressing problems of the patrons that come to the library? And we have it by youth patrons and adult patrons. And I'm in Athens main library, I want to point out that our library is sitting, and Trudy and Sarah, you could correct me if I get this wrong, is sitting within walking distance of about 3 different schools. Is it 3? So it's the middle school, high school, and an elementary school. So it is a very popular spot for kids to go after school, and in particular in the summer. So you'll see that the primary top issues that library staff reported facing really center around common issues in Athens related to poverty, unemployment, food insecurity, with mental health issues and stress coming up, and of course in disruptive behaviors that you might see, issues that you may see in across a lot of libraries. And in many ways, this reflects Athens more broadly, in terms of the interesting dichotomy that Athens as a university town in Georgia faces. And Trudy, I don't know if you wanted to chat a little bit more about Athens in particular, in terms of.
Sure. And you're absolutely right about the dichotomy between the university, or what Athens is perceived to be. Athens tends to rank very highly on best places to retire, best places to go to school. There's a whole lot going for Athens, but there's also just the reality of so many communities. When I first moved here about 15 years ago, there was a group called One Athens to try to, unite these two sides of it. And what it was dealing with was the fact that at the time, Athens, Clark County had the highest per capita, highest poverty rate for a community of its size in the nation. And that was just astounding. And so there's always this element of Athens of trying to improve and trying to work with the community to get rid of, to reduce poverty, to reduce homelessness.
Right.
But we do have the professors and the teachers and the doctors, but we also have, again, the high poverty rate. And I think before the pandemic, the last number we had was per capita mean income was $33,000. Unemployment is actually pretty low here. It went up, of course, during the pandemic, but right now we're probably at about 3% was the last number I heard. There's not a lot of industry here, but there's a lot of government work, that sort of thing.
Another challenge that we experience that's unique to Athens that I suspect might be common for other university towns is that we have a ton of nonprofits, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, an astounding number of nonprofits, and and the majority of them are very shallow in the services that they offer, because it's a lot of like mom and pop and aspiring students starting these up. So, the services they offer, the times that they offer, keeping up with resources in the community can be extremely difficult in a town that is driven often by the university, for better. And I can say this because I'm from the university, for better and for worse. UGA has a not ideal reputation in the community, and a lot of the work that many of us are doing is trying to shift that experience. But we could probably spend the whole hour talking about those challenges. I know that also one of the things that this grant and this project kind of was built off of are some of these community-wide efforts, not just to address poverty, but to address poverty in particular in children and adolescents. Because I'm at University of Georgia and the SEC football is a big, huge thing here. Athens, Georgia has the highest poverty rate of all SEC college towns. And so some of our efforts that influenced this trauma-informed library transformation were some community-wide efforts to apply trauma-informed care network framework community-wide. On that note, I'm going to try to be extremely brief, explaining what trauma is and trauma-informed care, and maybe assume that for most of you, you have a basic understanding of what we're talking about. We're talking about traumatic events, but I do want to emphasize a few things. Oftentimes when we talk about examples of adverse community experiences, traumatic events, toxic stressors, we only focus in on individual things that affect us, and we overlook community environment and experiences and traumas. So I really want to emphasize that when we're talking about traumatic events, we're talking about, things that go on inside the home, as well as things that go on outside the home, and the impact of structural inequity and intergenerational trauma and poverty and discrimination. And again, Trudy, feel free to jump in whenever. I also want to emphasize that, one of my concerns about trauma-informed care is that it's become a really popular buzzword and that it's being misused and misapplied. Trauma-informed care is not this training, frankly. This is a first step in the process, right? It's not a trauma 101 of what is trauma. It is a organizing framework. The way that I like to explain it, it's like changing the soil that things grow out of, right? So it's in the framework that we're operating here, ideally, what it is not just about organizational change in a library system, it's about having a community-wide safety net and creating safety, and also building upon the inherent strengths that libraries offer communities that are really and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I remember when I first heard of this collaboration and learned of this collaboration, it was one of those aha moments for me where I was like, oh my God, yes. Why aren't we doing this already? This is natural. Why am I, as a social worker, expecting people to come to me in my office? Why aren't I going to natural places where people gather? So in particular, I want to also emphasize that trauma-informed care, in addition to being an organizing framework, is also about balancing racial justice and an understanding of the impact of historical trauma and oppression. So actually, this is my favorite framework on this side to explain what trauma-informed care is. It's about balancing a commitment to trauma awareness along with that understanding of historical trauma and oppression through policies, practices, and procedures that create safety, restore power, and build self-worth. And that anchoring framework is what has guided every single thing that we do, that we will explain in more detail. I can't remember this is just a breakdown of what trauma-informed care principles, the main principles, look like at a community level, which is not something that is as commonly shared, right? Usually trauma-informed care principles are explained from an agency or an individual level framework. So one of the things that I was struck by, and again, this is something that folks in the library have known and probably been preaching for a long time, is that libraries are, one way I saw it described as like the community living room, right? Anyone can come in. Living in Georgia, that's not always the case. That in order to be able to attend University of Georgia, you have to have a birth certificate. So that prevents certain students from being able to join, but you don't need that to be able to go to the library, right? In particular, when you look at some of the aspects of culturally informed approach to trauma-informed care. It's about balancing an understanding of trauma with strength and resilience of the individuals, families, communities, and organizations that that surround you. So it's about realizing that there's the prevalence of trauma, both individually, collective, and collectively, as well as realizing the strengths and resilience. It's about recognizing the impact of trauma, responding by putting this knowledge into practice, resisting re-traumatization, and draw on traditional and collective healing tools. And perhaps my favorite, this is kind of unofficial, but this is where I think that libraries really shine better than almost any other organization, which is to rebuild connection to community, family, kin, country, culture, to connect body, mind, and spirit, to build those strengths. So I wasn't sure if Trudy, you wanted to add anything in on your perspective from someone who is relatively new to trauma-informed care.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, and you're absolutely right about the library, that everyone is welcome. And because everyone is welcome and comes in, we do deal with all kinds of behaviors and issues with our patrons. And just as librarian and staff members, we're trying to help people get the information that they need. And they're going to come in and they're going to be rude, they're having a bad day, you know, they could just be in, you know, frankly, just kind of a jerk today. But there's that part of us as library workers that we still need to provide them the information. And without knowing about the trauma-informed lens, we're already practicing some of these elements of how we're treating people, hopefully, how we're getting them the information that they need. And I 100% agree that adding the trauma-informed lens is such a good fit for public libraries. And so here, what we were doing and the roles that I played as the Assistant Director for Public Services, and frankly, a reference librarian, were getting the staff trained or understanding what they needed to do and working with the social workers. Now, a lot of this was UGA, their parts in it. As far as the staff assessment, they were doing the training and of course, hiring the social workers and that sort of thing, but we had to learn how to work with them in our system. And really the staff training was key. And that was one of the biggest questions, because when the first time you hear trauma informed, I know the first time I heard it, it took me a while to even understand that phrase. And I've been working with this for what, 2 years now, 3 years now. And still at times, because it's not my background, sometimes it doesn't click, and then other times it absolutely clicks. And for our staff, they were like, well, what is trauma informed? Again, it does mean a lot in the School of Social Work, or the field of social work, I should say, but it wasn't meaning a whole lot, especially in 2018 in the field of librarians. So again, we were working with the training, and this was done by, most of it was done by Carolyn Sharkey, who was our program coordinator, I believe, with the School of Social Work, and she did a lot of the training. We wanted to train on what exactly is trauma-informed care, what trauma is, and understanding trauma and how it impacts people long after the trauma. So what Jennifer alluded to earlier, we did an hour-long session on that one.
We also wanted to be responsive to what the staff, so part of the needs assessment was to determine what are the needs of the staff when it comes to training. What do staff find helpful? And part of that, frankly, is because I didn't anticipate, and I think a lot of us in social work, again, when you think about it, as someone in interdisciplinary practice, sometimes you assume a lot of things and you don't realize, but when I thought about it, yeah, it made absolute sense to me that you're frontline dealing with a lot of stuff, right? Behavioral issues, mental health issues, a ton of other kind of case management issues that go beyond the scope often of what's in the actual job description for folks who work in library. and that was part of the challenge, I think, initially, which is like, oh my God, I'm not a social worker. I'm a librarian. Am I going to be expected to do social work? So a lot of it was like an orienting process. So when we say a social worker walked into the library, a little bit is like, what are social workers? What do we do? And how do we, work together? And then doing the basics of what is trauma-informed care, what are we going to be doing? So given the acute needs in our community, some of the additional trainings that were offered was I don't know if folks know about what QPR, question, persuade, refer, is it's a suicide prevention training, like a crisis intervention training. We also had trainings in self-care and empathy. So in particular, what we had in that training, which I'm sorry I wasn't unable to attend, was scenarios and vignettes. And again, that was partly what folks wanted, was more vignettes. And like, I believe there were also, and you can correct me, I think there were self-care stations as well. So we tried to make the trainings more interactive. I'll say also, even though it seems like there are only 4 trainings, librarians don't just work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So we, for each of these trainings, they were offered 2, 3, 4 times sometimes to ensure that everyone had the opportunity to do it. And we also started to offer some basic de-escalation techniques and training.
And that was the one that had the little scenarios.
Oh, right.
That was the last one that we were able to do before the pandemic. The other 2, and the QPR that I didn't go to, but the other 2 were very informative in a, I would say, academic sort of way, but it was a de-escalation one that was really what the staff, I think, was really got the most out of at that time, because it was, this is what we're seeing and this is how we deal with it. We did have we had shared a lot of our incident reports of things that had actually happened with Caroline. She ended up not using those, which are probably best, but she had similar ones from other libraries. And we broke into groups and she passed out the scenarios, like you told someone to be quiet and they got loud and aggressive with you. And how would you handle that? Of course, it went into more detail. So we would kind of discuss how to handle it. And then we were given a second scenario, and it's more information, so that you found out that the lady who got really loud and aggressive when she was asked to be quiet, it was because of, she was triggered by how she was approached, and that was because of other incidents that happened in her life. So like so many people, they're not necessarily being, I want to say bad, I don't feel like that's the word I want to use, but have bad behavior just because, they're a mean person and they have bad behavior. There's always a reason behind it. We have to enforce our policies in the library. We have to make sure it's a safe place for everyone. And that includes the staff. And that's one reason why this training is so important, to know, so that the staff knows that we understand, I understand, I'm out there with them. And the training gives them that support to know that we realize how difficult a job this is. We are asking you to see things just a little bit different and approach things a little bit different. And we're going to be there behind you, reinforcing this and supporting you. Sometimes they don't always end well. The person is still going to stomp off. The person may still yell at you. And then they're going to walk out. And that's when that self-care one comes in.
Yes.
It was difficult. It wasn't a good day. And you have to take care of yourself because you've got to come back the next day or possibly even in 10 minutes and come back out and face the public again.
And what you're speaking to here is kind of a foundational kind of concept and way that people explain trauma-informed care, which is shifting from, you know, which folks in the audience may have heard, is shifting from what's wrong with you when you see an interaction that's troublesome to what happened to you. And then I would say the next level of what we're really shifting towards in the future is shifting from what happened to you to what's right with you, right? But I think that, you know, in speaking to folks who are kind of frontline workers and, you know, emergency services workers, is that it can be easier to blame a person. But when you understand what's driving behaviors, that can also be difficult to deal with. It can be challenging to be empathetic and understanding, especially when you're unable to do anything, especially when you might still have to call law enforcement or security, even though you may not want to. And that, I think, is where some of the self-care and secondary trauma components come in. I will say in some of the listservs that I'm involved in that are for library social work folks, the question of de-escalation training and techniques comes up quite a bit, because there's some good de-escalation trainings and there's some problematic and troublesome ones that aren't trauma informed. So finding a good training that's affordable, and also trauma and sensitive to trauma, and doesn't ask library staff to do too much, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to physically intervene with anyone personally. But I do know that's sometimes required. So a key component of our partnership was having social work interns placed in the library for multiple days in the week. Some of these services are more common to what you might expect when we have social workers and social services in libraries, which is fairly increasingly common across the country, right? We had the benefit of a grant that allowed us to have a social work clinical supervision of the social work interns, and paid for her salary, which is a barrier for many libraries. But so we had multiple interns that were carefully selected by our field director, field office director. So we really had, for that first group of interns, really experienced independent social work students who were really capable of kind of holding the fort without a lot of infrastructure and support of other social workers, to do what we call brokered case management. Like, so that would be like a warm handoff. I'm going to connect you to this resource, and to work with folks who might walk in and say, I have an issue that I would like your help with. At times, what that involved was them walking around and interacting with folks, not just waiting for folks to come to them. And that was challenging for interns at the beginning. I'm not going to lie, I'd have a challenging time with it as well. I'd be just sitting in my office like, nobody came today.
Yeah, and it was challenging for the staff too, and that was one of the biggest mysteries, I would say mysteries, when we were first getting the interns was, well, you know, first of all, the staff knew that they weren't social workers, so they weren't sure how they were supposed to handle this. And then, well, how do we get the patron to the social worker without violating the patron's confidentiality or anything like that? And when I look back at that, I think, boy, did we overthink that. Like, I think so many times we do in libraries, and we're just like, you know, every possibility you just think about. But in the end, that was really one of the easiest things, was that if we were helping someone with, you know, whatever form, whatever, you know, food compass or food stamps assistant, that sort of thing is kind of the one of the most common ones. And you would help them just, you know, with the how to sign in, that sort of thing. And then you could say, well, we do have social work interns here today. Would you like someone to speak with you? And they would come out, or sometimes the patron would go in to the social workers. Right. By the time we had to close everything up, we were on such a roll
Yeah,
Everyone
it was.
was. And people were coming in specifically to speak to the interns.
Yeah.
We get questions, even though we've been back in the building full-time now since the middle of May, but limited hours since October. We still have people coming in and looking for them. And the staff has been asking as well. At this point, I don't know that we'll have the interns back anytime soon, but we do have funds to hire a social worker. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next few months. So we'll be able to resume that service.
We're going to talk a little bit about how, sorry to interrupt, we're going to talk a little bit about how, so my understanding is that you're absolutely right, that like the number of patrons who sought social work intern resources and help skyrocketed from the first month or two to like 50 or 60 people and in a month. And it was just, and really complex needs, not simple, straightforward challenges. So we're going to talk, and this is where Sarah's going to come in to talk a little bit about like what specifically did we do that helped increase the kind of like skyrocketing number of patrons who sought social work services.
Because one of the first things that they did was pull together a database, a spreadsheet really is what it was, right, with some of that Jennifer mentioned, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits
in Athens alone.
It's crazy, and it's wonderful, but there are a lot of agencies in town. It's hard for anyone to get a handle on them, and a lot of times the interns weren't from the community. They may have moved just to go to school here, so wasn't necessarily a lot of knowledge about what was going on. And certainly Sarah and I and other librarians are aware of some of them, but not all of them. Right. So what we did with Caroline's help was divided the agencies into these categories that you can see, and then we divided the interns and paired them with one of our full-time librarians. And that accomplished at least two goals. And one was getting to know the agencies and doing this face-to-face. I mean, you can look on their website, but it's not the same as visiting and talking to the manager. And the other thing it did was it provided some really good professional outreach and networking opportunities for the librarians who in our community just haven't had a whole lot of opportunities to do that. And so Sarah was paired with one of our interns, and they did most of the visits before we closed up last March. And so I'm going to ask Sarah now to talk a bit about what she and Peggy did.
Okay, hey everyone, thank you for letting us speak with y'all today. My name is Sarah List, and I'm a reference librarian here in Athens County Library, and I was paired with Peggy Patchett, and she was a social work intern working on her degree from the UGA School of Social Work. And our little bit of joy was the mental health, medical health, and social services aspect. So we went to a lot of different agencies between October of 2019 and February of 2020. We went to Advantage Behavioral Health. We went to the Athens Nurses Clinic. We went to Family Connection as well. And a big thing that I learned from all of that was to switch my lens, because I've been in libraries now for 12 years, but it wasn't until 2018 when we started talking about trauma-informed that I even started thinking about it. So my lens switched from the homeless population to people experiencing homelessness. And it switched from why is this person acting so crazy to what trauma has this person experienced that may be affecting their behavior. And libraries are a really good bridge between the community and the patrons. And that's one thing that I really loved about working with the social work interns and the social workers. And we definitely do need a social worker in the building at all times. So it was a very good experience for me.
And I'll add, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a moment and say that one of my increasing concerns about trauma-informed care as an implementation framework is that is questioning the ethics of informing and educating everyone to be aware of trauma, to recognize trauma, but not have any resources available to address the trauma. And that's why such a heavy emphasis of this presentation and our approach to this work is about linking up to local resources and to brokering access to these resources. And I know that it may seem like a straightforward and obvious thing to do site visits, to touch base with these local agencies, but in a community where we have over 300 different nonprofits and social service agencies where the turnover is really high, it is extremely difficult to get a resource guide to our community that's up to date. I just saw a recent one that was passed out by, well, I won't say who, but a resource guide to services in Athens that was out of date. Right. And my first thought was, well, they should have gone to the library and connected with TILT because we have an updated one with all the accurate information. So that really is core, in my opinion, if you want to have ethical, appropriate approach to trauma-informed care implementation. And yeah.
And it was important for the interns and, the ones that Sarah and Peggy visited, and just even in the database to get the accurate information. And I think because they're going to make referrals and they need to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Not just but I think the best example, especially in our community, is where we do have people who are undocumented. Yeah. And so there are a lot of healthcare, not a lot, unfortunately, but there are healthcare places or whatever places.
Yeah.
And it's important to know whether they're going to have to show documentation to get those services. And so they absolutely don't want to refer someone who doesn't have that documentation, is probably already unwilling or scared to go to any sort of agency to get assistance that they need. And that was really important. And that was a key thing that they were asking when they were going to these visits. And in talking to I think it was Peggy, as a matter of fact, before they left, and what they were saying was doing the visits and doing the one-on-one interviews with the managers or whoever gave them more confidence in doing the referrals. Because again, I mean, like the librarians, we can look at their website and we can say, well, here you go, you can try this place. But with the interns and knowing more about them, they can really help know that this is a good fit for you, for your need. And it was really great to have them here. It was really important. One of the other things we did with the interns that's was really successful was the tabling events. They did it, I shouldn't say we. The interest of our library, like probably other libraries, is like, Grand Central, and everyone has to walk by this spot right in the lobby. And it's a great place to table. They started doing these weekly. They would usually have a theme, not always, but a lot of times they would have a theme like healthcare or education, and they would invite nonprofits who were in that area to come table with them. So we would have information about TILT and then whatever agency that happened to be tabling with them. And the nonprofit love to table at the library, not just with the TILT, but we would frequently get requests from other people because they know everyone is here. We get all walks of life, and that's just a great place to come into. And another thing that we found was that if you saw, for instance, maybe the Council on Aging would have been here, they were a good table partner. You might not need that service yourself, but when you stop and talk to someone, you may realize, I have a loved one, I have a friend, I have a neighbor who could use that service, who wasn't at the library. And it's nothing that you would have thought, oh, I need to call the Council on Aging. But when you see them in the library, you'll stop and get that information. So it was a really great place. And they they were talking to 15 to 30 people at every
Wow.
event, giving information out. So those were being really successful too. And again, it's everything stopped last March. I mean, we were really on a roll. The people were coming in for the social workers, the librarians and the social work interns were going out into the community. And
yeah, that's a whole nother webinar, right? Like I will say,
so what we're doing going forward, since we've been back, even though we haven't had the social work interns back in, the grant continues. We added some partners I think it was in 2019, actually, we added some partners. It's a community catalyst grant. And so partners with the community are a key thing. We started working with some agencies for youth mentoring. We had one of the local agencies come in the afternoons when we would have 60 to 70 middle schoolers here, and just kind of doing that outreach and helping our staff with the kids who were here. We were able to give some support money to them, to a group called Chess and Community, which works with youth and chess, a lot of at-risk youth playing chess and the lessons that chess teaches for life, apparently. There's a tutoring group that was receiving some money. In the past year, since patrons haven't been in the building as much as they had been, of course, we started doing some more social justice work with the grant. One thing that was actually planned before the pandemic was a bus trip to Montgomery to see the
Legacy Memorial.
Yeah, the Civil Rights Museum. That's not the actual name of it. I'm sorry, I can get that, but that's still planned. I think we're looking at maybe next year, maybe in February, but we've had to postpone that. Right. And then more recently, we're doing a one book community group where we're reading Stamped, and we're supporting this with the IMLS grant because the social justice part of it that Jennifer referred to earlier is key. The trauma.
We've certainly seen that in the past year between both pandemics of COVID as well as racial justice, that these things really are linked. I know that Caroline and some of the interns felt that the weekly tabling was probably the biggest contributor, one of the biggest contributors to success. And part of that is because of the physical layout of the library is such that social work interns are typically, and social workers are not in a central location otherwise. And I know that we're running a bit short on time, but I did want to also add very quickly before we show you a little video is that another kind of behind the scenes thing that Caroline and I did was a policy review and an environmental scan where we kind of pulled together different guides from different resources about evaluating trauma-informed policies, trauma-informed physical environments to assess library policies in the environment and kind of see here's what's doing really well. Here are some recommendations for changes that you might want to consider. So for example, in our policy manual, a lot of it is just language, as Sarah pointed out, shifting some of the way person first language, gender pronouns, things like that. But I'm going to skip and leave some so we can have plenty of time for questions. But before we show the video, were there any final thoughts that Trudy and Sarah that you wanted to add?
I'm hoping that we can resume the training with the staff. And I think that was one thing that we would have been able to tackle had we not had to shut everything down, because we do have a lot of staff turnover. And even those of us who have been here can use refreshers. And that's one thing that I hope that we'll be able to get back to is the staff training. It's been really great. I've learned a lot doing the trauma-informed training and seeing things through a trauma-informed lens.
Mhm.
And I think our patrons are better off when we're able to help them that way. But I also know, because I've been there, sometimes it's hard to do at the time. You know, the
Yeah.
person is really angry, or
It's definitely not a
whatever,
one and done
unreasonable.
thing.
And it's easy to look back and say, gosh, I should have said this,
Yeah.
or if only I had thought this way. And
Mhm.
I know, and I always tell my staff, we do the best we can at the time. And then we think about it and we learn how we can do better, or how
Right.
we could have done better. And sometimes it just has to go that way. But
Mhm.
I think it's really important. The staff was on board, I won't say 100%, but I do feel like there was an overall amount of support from our staff for
Yeah.
this. They loved having the social work interns. I think the trauma-informed things was not quite as natural for them,
Right.
but the staff that was here were really coming along, and I'm hoping that we can pick that up again.
And I think this might address some of the questions that folks were asking in the audience, but we do have a toolkit that is almost complete, that has, for example, some of the guides for everything that we did, the presentations, the tabling. We even have some recommendations for de-escalation training that kind of are better than to focus in on, that we might recommend. That will be posted shortly on our library website, as well as the School of Social Work. We're almost done with it, almost. So that will, the guide, the toolkit will include, for example, the checklists that we developed from multiple sources, all that kind of stuff. Should we show the video?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're at 10 we could post or send a link to the video, since there are some questions. The video's 5 minutes.
We can hold off on the video and leave some time for if folks want to have ask questions.
We do have just a few questions. Let's see. So you may have just answered this, but any examples of good trauma-informed de-escalation trainings, or those we should avoid? So you had mentioned that the toolkit was coming out soon. Is there anything off the top of your head, or should we kind of wait for that toolkit to come out?
I reviewed it. I reviewed our, I can't think of it off the top of my head. No, I'm sorry. But we did have my colleague, Caroline, did have a couple in particular that she reviewed and felt were pretty good. She did some of the background investigative work and talking to some of the different organizations. But I'm sorry, I can't. I shouldn't have said that and invaded everyone. So I apologize. But
I think we could probably share that before the toolkit is ready, because that's just a section of it. Yeah. Maybe we can send it, Courtney, to you, and you can send it out to the participants, just that part of it.
Absolutely. And then we can also post it on our website as well, if you're okay with that.
I also think some of it, I think, is about not taking a cookie cutter approach, even though we're providing a cookie cutter, and figuring out like what is feasible and realistic and what are folks comfortable with. I am 5'9", and so when I started as a social worker in settings that required like physical restraint, I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm probably going to be the one tasked with doing physical restraint, right? And so depending on what setting you're in, the challenges your organization faces, the amount of money you have for training may dictate what you're able to do.
Samantha says, thank you for this important webinar. Were the weekly tabling sessions at your main library only, or out in branches as well? If they were occurring at branches, were they tailored to the needs of the branch patrons?
Thanks. That's a great question. The ones we were doing were just here at this library. The branch libraries, because the grant was focused on Athens Clarke County, they weren't doing the tabling sessions. But that's a really good point. And I think as we start opening up community-wise, that sort of thing, that would be a good thing for them to do. I've heard from a couple of organizations that want to come back and table in the library, and some with the branches too. It's just a physical, they just don't have the space for it.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, everything needs to be tailored to the
Yes.
to the community, and since our branch libraries are very rural,
Yeah.
so they would have different needs than
Really.
this more centrally located one here in Athens.
And I would imagine that, like, you know, having not lived in Indiana, but a lot of the same challenges that you all are facing in terms of access to resources in more rural communities versus the more urban centers. And so that's partly the challenge. And that honestly is one of, as everyone knows here, the biggest features of a library is access to the internet for being able to have some of these services. There's some really incredible innovative things being done with telehealth in some libraries that are really innovative.
And Kara just has a comment. I think this is the first time I really understand the phrase trauma, what the phrase trauma-informed care means.
Excellent.
I
Yeah,
totally get that, Kara. I understand that too. It's like,
yeah.
this is
And then
like,
Samantha says, thank you. I'm in a rural library with a main library and a branch, so your answers are helpful.
And I'll also add that, you know, as again, someone who's new to the work that librarians do, you know, I really appreciate everything you're doing. And if you haven't already done so, reach out to a school of social work that's nearest to where you're located. Because if they haven't seen, and I believe there is some good work being done with library social work in Indiana, but it's one of those obvious connections that that many of us on my side, speaking for my folks, don't realize it until it hits us over the head.
Okay,
So thank you for everything that you do.
If you have any more questions, feel free to put those in the chat now. Lisa, let's go ahead and stop the recording.